Tony, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Eric. Pleasure to be here.
So, for the audience, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Tony Gugino. I am the owner and I guess you could say jack of all trades here at 8th District Distilling Company in Manchester, Connecticut. I am newly licensed, so I am just getting started in my venture. It was quite a few months, but ready to start taking it on the head now.
Yeah, I love master generalist, as all good business owners must be. We were chatting offline about lots of fun regulatory stuff, and for context, you and I met last October at a fun gin course held by our friend Gary over at BDAS, and I want to share my first impression of you because I think it may actually be useful for our conversation here. So I walked into the room. First of all, I like to be punctual and early, and you were there before me. So strike one. Already somebody beat me. You were speaking easily with multiple people who, like other students and some of the teachers. I struggle to break the ice. So strike two already. I see this guy. You're in better shape than me. You were wearing a baseball cap with a fish hook on it, and I was like, damn it, this guy probably outfishes me too. So I was already like, all right, prepared not to like this guy. And as the course went on, I listened to your input, listened to your background. I was like, oh, this guy's like super thoughtful. And then to cap it all off, we had a couple of good chats. And then at the end of the course, you wrote personalized thank you notes to all of the instructors. And I was just like, hot damn, like this guy is somebody that I want to keep in touch with. So I wanted to share my private impressions with you just for a little context there.
No, I appreciate that. That was quite the fun course. Shout out to Gary down at Brewing, Distilling, Analytical Services in Kentucky. Just the masses of minds we had there too, not just distillers, but people in your shoes, great judges and podcast hosts. So the input we had there was fantastic. So I appreciate that.
So now that we know kind of the basics about you and how you and I met, I'm hoping we can take a sort of a biographical left turn before we get into the meat of our discussion. And I'm curious, I know nothing about this. I'm curious to know your background and your relationship with hunting, fishing, and foraging.
So, very intimate with the outdoors myself. You find me outside more often than not. I am a very avid fisherman, avid gardener, avid forager. So hunting, I'm unfortunately not too big into it. My wife is a vegetarian, so the fact that she lets me fish and harvest my fish is a win I'm going to take and keep with, and I'll let my friends hunt and I'll borrow their meat. But no, the outdoors and I have always been something I've clung to. I'm the youngest of three brothers. We're all 2 years apart. And growing up, obviously, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have, Netflix at our whim. So my mom, with us three being around, she was like, I need to get these boys, out of the house doing something. So she put fishing poles in our hands. And ever since then, the Gugino name is almost synonymous with fishing. My brother works for Costa Sunglasses and is starting his own charter business up in Massachusetts. My middle brother, he works for Lindt with chocolate, but he still comes with us all the time. So something that is just, a part of me that I'll never not do.
Yeah. Do you remember any places where you would frequently fish or forage when you were growing up, or any species or any I guess not sense memories, but outdoor memories that come up and are particularly strong that you really remember fondly?
Yeah, I mean, I could almost write a 100-page chapter book about all the memories I have about being outside with nature. But like the big ones that stick out to me, are with my brothers growing up. You know, my whole family's from Buffalo. So we would go up there and go to Lake Erie, and we'd have bamboo fishing rods, and we'd sit there and we'd catch a bunch of sunfish, rock bass, you know, the occasional largemouth or smallmouth if we were lucky. And then growing up, we ended up finding this pond down the road called Buena Vista, which you can no longer fish. But we ended up meeting one of our, which we call him like, he's our adopted brother, as we call it. You know, he's just so close to us. We met him fishing there, all three of us. And it's been a lifelong friendship still. But those have been great memories. And then, you know, always the ones of my brothers, since being the youngest, getting hooked by them all the time because I'm catching more fish, not accidentally, you know, I'm just better. So, you know, just I really can't pinpoint a specific one just because of how many I have. You know, we were all counselors at Camp Woodstock in Woodstock, Connecticut too, where we led the fishing program there. So we were always, you know, teaching youth how to fish as well and bringing them into the sport, which not only was a great feeling there, but, you know, connecting with my brothers as well, with being able to pass down, you know, our knowledge of the sport has been something that we try to continue to do to this day with the camp.
What do you think the difference is between the mindset of somebody who's a really experienced fisherman versus somebody who has never done it before and who just, you know, walks up to, you know, two people, let's say in this situation, a real expert and a complete novice walk up to the same body of water? What do you think is going on in the brain of the person who's the real expert? And this could go for foraging as well, right? You know, two people walk up to the same patch of woods with an empty basket. What do you think is different about the mind or the mindset of the expert versus that of the novice?
So I think I'm going to try to word this correctly, but the expert is able to, I guess you would call it, be a little bit more spatially aware, where the novice can walk in and, you know, let's say, for instance, where I'm going on a backpacking trip for 3 days and it's around a lake, you know, 30-mile loop, whatever, up and down, let's say 10,000 elevation gain and loss. I can break it up where, you know, I can see the points where I'll need to stop, where it's smart to stop, where it's good to fish, good to forage, you know, good to camp, where the novice will walk in and be so excited with how much there is, but not know what steps to take. And really the only way to do it is by doing it, you know, lack of a better word. But, you know, it's not necessarily that they make more mistakes or this, they might just have to work a little bit harder, where if they go to, if the wind's blowing west and they fish the east bank, it's a little bit silly. You should go to the west bank because it's pushing the bait that way. Just a little bit easier to understand where you're going. Or if you look at where the sun rises and sets, you'll be able to find certain botanicals and certain trees and certain, you know, different things in those areas, as opposed to you look for the mossier, shadier, wetter areas when you're looking for your mushrooms. But the novice will walk in and be like, oh, there's something, there's something, there's something, there's something. And that enthusiasm is first and foremost what you need. But then you have to, as you get more and more knowledgeable with whatever you're doing, you're able to channel your enthusiasm into more efficient and productive avenues, I guess you could say. And that goes with business too. You know, I didn't get a business degree. I didn't go to a 4-year college and do all this. I said, I want to start a company. I want to do this. Let's do it. And I'm enthusiastic still to this day. Did I make mistakes? Absolutely. Will I continue? Sure. Would I have made it easier if I had gotten a 4-year degree? Maybe. But I'm happy with how I learned it, and that's how I'll always go through life in the outdoors. It's just by learning, by doing.
Yeah, the interesting, what I'll call maybe a paradox, right, about the subject that we're talking about today, hunting, fishing, foraging, and then we'll get into the how that applies to spirits and cocktails in just a minute here. The interesting paradox to me is that there is almost zero barrier to entry, right?
Yeah.
Anybody with a pulse can do this.
Mhm.
And that's exciting to me, right? I love activities and hobbies and passions that can be developed without much barrier to entry and without much cost either.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's, sorry to cut you off really quick, but now that we're just talking more, my first real foraging memory that I can forage out of my brain now is at camp during hiking class with one of my counselors, Dan Palmer, who's unfortunately no longer with us, but we would be walking around and he showed me how to find birch bark and sarsaparilla bark. And just walking through the woods and grabbing those and chewing on those was just such a cool feeling because, of course, I loved birch beer, like the soda. It's fantastic. But the fact that I could go pull a twig off and chew on it and still get that same flavor, just, I mean, how cool is that? It's just fun,
yeah. Right. And there's a right there-ness of it too, right? I mean, of course, when it's not right there, you got to go find it. But when it is right there, it's like opening the cabinets in your own kitchen, right? And so, I mean, to kind of complete the paradox that I guess I wanted to put out there, it's got this insanely low barrier to entry, and yet it takes so many reps and so much practice and so many different angles and looks to really become a master at any of these activities that we're talking about, whether it's foraging, fishing, hunting, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
because every day that you go out is a different day. It's going to be a slightly different season. It's, last night it rained. Okay, then you'll go out and, it didn't rain the night before that. And, the wind's blowing from a different direction this day. You never encounter the same landscape 2 times in a row because something is just inherently different. So it's the paradox to me is there's no barrier to entry, and yet to be real good at it, it takes a long, long, long time. And there's no, as you mentioned, as you were just sort of explaining, there's no playbook for it. So I wanted to leave that out there. And maybe this would be a good time. I'm sure we'll weave foraging and fishing in here as we go. But you had the opportunity to compete on a show that probably a lot of people listening will be familiar with, Moonshiners Master Distiller. And the theme, I guess, of your competition was related to foraging. So I'm wondering if you could walk us through your experience on that show and maybe your approach to building a spirit using foraged ingredients.
Yeah. No, that was an awesome experience going on the show, and I luckily was able to get on an episode where it was foraging in your home state. Where when I first found out, they weren't really sure if I was going to forage in Tennessee or if I was going to forage back home. So immediately I hopped online and started reading about I guess you could call it the terroir of Tennessee, to understand, what's native to Tennessee, what could I utilize down there, what could I find easily with my knowledge from New England. Luckily, they changed it to foraging from home and bringing your ingredients down with you. Oddly enough, I never applied for the show. They reached out to me on Instagram, I guess, recruiting agency for it all, just because I'm active on there and I post about distilling and the outdoors and whatnot. And they asked if I wanted to be on it, and I'd go down in like 3 weeks. And I was like, good thing I've been doing this in the back end for a while. So I luckily had, some herbs that I had dried off that I had harvested. Some I grew at home in my own garden. And I knew I wanted to make a botanical spirit, but for gin, I was like, man, it's going to be hard to make a gin because I don't have my neutral. I don't have my base to easily get there. I don't have the fermentation conditions. So I'm starting to think like what's local to New England in a sense. And rum has a huge history in New England. Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, the whole nine. So I said, oh, I love molasses. So I brought my molasses with me, which is in my eyes, a foraged sugar because it's the byproduct from the big guys. And I also wanted to bring some fruits into it. So I used Coosa dogwood berries and beach plums, which beach plums and Coosa berries aren't really a everyday off the shelf product, but they are fantastic. Coosa berries are extremely easy to get. They're outside most police departments in Connecticut, oddly enough. Makes no sense. But then the beach plums are pain in the tuchus to get. You get stung, you get your thorns, but the reward is huge. So I guess to tie it all in, I had just went into my Rolodex, I guess you could say, of now I know I'm going to be doing a molasses-based gin. So let's work with it that way. I did buy my juniper, of course, because I couldn't forage all that myself here. And juniper is an interesting one too, because there's so many different types of juniper. You got to make sure you're getting the right one, and just kind of wanted to make it easy with that. So went that way and knew what my base spirit was going to be. But they wanted us to go to second and third parts if you go forward, where you flavored your spirit, you did a final spirit run and then you flavored your spirit at the end. So final spirit run, I harvested a lot of lemon verbena from my garden, brought that down there for that. And then for my flavoring aspect, I made a Coosa dogwood berry jam, and I harvested sea salt from Long Island Sound and made that back at home. So that's where I brought a big version of terroir into it all, because salt is so different no matter where you get it from. And it's one of the easiest things in the world to make at home and do it yourself. Go down to the shore, grab some water, filter it if you want to a little bit, and then just set it in a pan and leave it. When it's done, you scrape the salt off and you have a fantastic salt. One of the guys on the show was like, he tried the salt and he's like, this reminds me of being back home on Long Island on the water, which is exactly where I got it from. So just fun. And it was a great learning experience. It challenged the hell out of me. I wasn't going to go at first because I was like, why'd they reach out to me? I'm a younger distiller. They're pointing me to lose in a sense, but thought about talking to my daughter down the road about it all, being like, oh, I could have been on that TV show, and her rolling her eyes, being like, okay, Dad, another one of your stories. So I just did it. I went for it, and luckily enough, I took home the W from it all. So that was a fun time and was a catalyst for where I am today. So.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'm excited to watch the episode. It's not quite the newest season is not available on the apps that I have access to, but as soon as it goes live, I'm excited to check that out. Now, a couple technical follow-ups. So did you do a vapor infusion or a maceration with the beach plums and the juniper, and then what forage components flavored the spirit at which steps? Break that down a little bit more granularly for us.
My mash was molasses, Coosa dogwood berries, beach plums, and I steeped a tea as well. So I had used mint, coriander, lemon verbena, and those were and a couple star anise seeds, not pods, as a tea before I added my molasses during fermentation. And then I just ran that as is for my first spirit run, which then we got our ranking order for our still pick. And people who know the show, everybody wants to go for the thumper. I don't like thumpers. I just haven't used them much. So I went for a super simple still with a vapor infusion gin basket, where on my spirit run, I loaded that with all those botanicals, the juniper, the coriander, the lemon verbena, mint, basil, lemon, lime, and orange. And I forgot my star anise seeds in there, but luckily it actually helped me because the judges don't love star anise. So it came out, and it was I did my flavor cuts and I blended my favorite jar, handed it in, and then the flavoring side, which was getting, I guess you could say, getting ready to put in a bottle to sell, was where I added the gooseberry jam and the sea salt. So it was a molasses-based gin, and it was flavored with the gooseberry and salt, and they called it gin rummy, which oddly enough was such a great name because my wife and I have a running game of gin rummy for the past nine years now. She's ahead by like 1,000 points, but we got a lifetime to go, so I might get back.
Exactly. Yeah, it's journey of 1,000 miles. You got to start one hand at a time. So I'm really glad I pushed on that because I think the choices that you made there are a little bit telling, right? So, you go on a show called Moonshiners, you kind of expect them to go for the moonshine still. I mean, honestly, you did what I would have done. Now, I'm not a distiller, but if I was put in a position to make a foraged spirit, I would go botanical. And if you're going botanical, you want the gin basket. So, bam. Now, you also you kind of went extra, right? You made a tea. Normally when you do a fermentation, you just stick something starchy or sugary into water and bam, the yeast and the sugar source are going to be the primary flavoring agents there. But you got this stuff, might as well add it to the fermentation step. So you're getting flavor at the fermentation step, you're getting flavor in the gin basket, and then of course you've got the sort of addition of the jam and the salt at the end. So you've got this lightly sweetened botanical spirit, and I think it's even still appropriate for rum, which is, as a category, it allows for the addition of a little bit of sugar historically. So I think you've got a really technically sound spirit, and it's got the flavor integrated at so many points. And this is something that we learned, in the gin class too. Like the more opportunities that you have to kind of really juice your botanical profile, you should really take those because that's what's gonna make something really distinctive. And then of course you've got this beautiful, almost chefy thing that you do at the end, where you add salt, and that salt just with a little bit of sugar and a little bit of salt, it just amplifies flavors so much. So I think as daunting as that must have been to execute in 3 weeks, I mean, I think it's a case study in how to take foraged ingredients and get the most flavor out of them. So I mean, what are your other takeaways from that competition? Has it made you excited to try and do stuff like that in your own distillery now?
Oh yeah. It's a little different when it's, I guess, the legal side of things, not on the Moonshiners show. But it definitely has opened my eyes to bringing foraged ingredients into the distillery. And unlike a lot of distilleries out there, I am so small where this is, if you look behind me without the glare right now, but this is my shop, it's as is. I want to be a batch made guy. I'm not opening my distillery saying, I have this line of gin, this line of rum, this line of vodka. Let's go sell as much as we possibly can to however many stores we can. So I just want to be able to encapsulate those flavors in that season into a bottle. So when Christmas rolls around, I've already started foraging for this, where I'm hoping to get it done this year. If not, it'll be for next year. But a Christmas tree gin, where that sounds so quintessential, where everybody who tries gin, everybody goes, I don't like it. It tastes like Christmas tree. But they're not understanding the flavor behind it all. They just get the dryness right up front. So I've been talking to Christmas tree farms where they obviously trim their trees every single year. But with conservation in mind, I've gone out and I've clipped a couple tips of the trees, the spruce tips and fir tips, and harvested those in, and I'm going to concentrate those flavors down to see how I can really represent those in a gin. And I already know Jamie from the from our gin class we took. He's going to put his nose in the air because it's not a gin, and I tend to agree with him in a sense. I wish there was a different category of a new American gin where, yes, we do have juniper in it, but it might not be the leading profile of it all. Juniper is so important in gin because it rounds off so many flavors, but I don't necessarily think it needs to be the number one you pick out of it every single time. So especially with foraging botanicals, that's going to be my easiest way to do it. But outside of that, towards the end of summer, when the gooseberries start to come out, I'll grab a bunch of those and I'll do a straight fermentation of them and do a gooseberry brandy in a sense, where I'll do a single pass distillation on my copper alembic still. So it's really raw flavors. I'm not going to take all this out and refine it as much as I can. It's bringing it back to just the simpler times of good fermentation, good ingredients leads to good spirits. And I'm not trying to strip anything from it all. I want it to be raw and real and have it as it is.
So if you were to make some recommendations, give some advice to people who might be interested in getting into foraging for food, or, there are definitely distillers and bartenders who listen to this show. So whether we're talking about cocktails or actual distilling, what are some really important things that people should keep in mind if they've never started foraging before and they intend to go out and try their hand at it?
Well, you definitely got to, there's some stuff you can't forage, right? Certain ingredients that you can't touch, which you should have some type of base knowledge. And luckily, we do have the internet now where there is so much information on there of where you are, what's local to you, and what's easy to get. There's also a lot of foraging clubs out there on social media where you can learn from them, but definitely, or just start easy, grab some, if you see some wild roses, grab some rose petals and make a little tea and see what it tastes like. Go cut a little bit off an evergreen and put it up and put that into a tea as well. It really allows you to not just smell the flavor, but taste the flavor in a very simple way. But also, I did want to touch on this too. A huge part of foraging that's so important is conservation. So, ramp season just was around the corner, and with ramps, when you get up to a field, the want as a new forager, or a forager doesn't really care, is to be like, I just hit the mother lode and grab every single one. Go back next year and good luck. They're all gone. So you also you can't take every bit of fruit. You can't take every botanical. You can't take every spruce tip or fir tip or every, hen of the woods in the ground, because, well, the mushrooms are a little different. But the basis of it all, and into hunting and fishing, is respecting nature, understanding that if you take too much, then you can use. That's wrong. And don't abuse it. We want it to be here for generations to come. So you can get you can get as much as you need, but you can't just get all of it from one place.
And that, that can be part of the frustration of it too, right? Is you go out with the intention of getting something that is, quote, in season, right? So you and I know that it's ramp season, we hop in the truck, we go to a place where we think it's likely, and we could very easily get skunked. And, so that there is some frustration that can be built into the process. But I think, to me, the difference between something that's foraged and something that's cultivated is, this as a gardener as well, you get two very different types of pleasure from it. When you cultivate something, you're like, I am responsible for tending this thing. I planned it, I sprouted it, I put it in the ground, I watered it, I fertilized it, I weeded, I tied it off, I made sure that the fruit was not, raided by animals. And now when I, enjoy this tomato, that's the kind of pleasure that I get, the pleasure of that process and your personal hand in it. But the pleasure of foraging is almost a pleasure that derives from not succeeding despite nature, but succeeding because nature allowed you to succeed. And I think, I don't know, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way of putting it. I mean, nature will always win. I'll put that first and foremost. Like, you look at something abandoned and you can see how quickly nature will take over. But there's that mutual respect between nature and human beings that I feel like people who are avid in the outdoors embody, big time, because they understand that what you give, you get, and if you overtake, it's gone. So it's just it allows you to be. I don't want to sound like a hippie in a sense, but synonymous with nature, because at the end of the day, that's where every single bit of what we have, food wise, started from. The basis. I mean, sure, some of it's now, a lot of it all is chemically made and derived now, but all that at once started from the ground or the sea or in a plant or grown from whatever. So I'll just keep on, diving that word of just respect for nature, where, that's a huge thing that you have to promote. And once you are able to, get something for free from nature that was grown, where you didn't have to fertilize, you didn't have to water it, you didn't have to tend to it, you didn't have to wake up in the middle of the night because there was a big windstorm coming in and brace the branches. You were able to go outside, pick it, and bring it home. That feeling is just, it's so rewarding, and I feel like it tastes better. It's fresher is always better. And what's fresher than being able to cut it and cook it within minutes if you're camping?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's something creative about it, right? In the way that a garden is fruitful because you've made all these different optimizations as a gardener, especially if you have the benefit of year after year developing your plot and really planning and taking those sunfish that you caught with your bamboo rod and burying them in the springtime so that the plants can eat them up over the summer and fall. Great tip. So a garden is fruitful, but there's something inherently creative of just going out and finding something that was growing there without any sort of intervention. And that reminds me of probably the chief piece of advice that you hear people say when it comes to, taking something that was foraged or something from the natural world and using it in a flavor application, which is what grows together goes together, right? If it's naturally occurring, chances are there's a reason why things naturally occur together. And that's a great place to start when it comes to developing flavors. So I think a great case study, obviously the spirit that you just described from Moonshiners Master Distiller, that's a great case study in what grows together goes together. But it also makes me think of cocktails. So you as a distiller, when you forage when talking about that brandy that you are planning to make, you're going to have to forage a buttload of those berries in order to make that brandy. It's going to be very labor intensive. But when you're just trying to make cocktails, well, now if you're just trying to make them for yourself, that just requires maybe a handful or a pinch of something. And even if you do it for a bar, there's some of the best bar programs in the world actually employ professional foragers to supply ingredients for their menu. So I wanted to get your thoughts on using these forage ingredients, not just for spirits, but also for cocktails. Any thoughts on that?
Oh yeah. I mean, what's the easiest way to elevate a cocktail is with a garnish, right? So not only now are you able to forage your garnish, but it doesn't necessarily have to be quote unquote edible at that point. It could be something pretty you see. The flavor doesn't have to be what you're going for in that aspect. You're foraging a picture in a sense. You could find, you're making a last word and you find a small little twig that has one little leaf left on it. And it's like, oh, it's the last word of the twig or whatever, something silly where you could play those off each other. But then on the other side, having a cocktail program, like you said, you don't have to utilize as much quantity as I would have to in a production standpoint. And people also love one-off stuff that they see on social media and they want to get down there and try because you're only able to make 50 of that. So let's say you're walking down the woods and you come across a birch tree and you find a couple young twigs and you grab those and you bring them back in, you boil them and you make a birch simple syrup out of it. Utilize that into, I don't know, whatever you want to do. Make a daiquiri with a birch simple syrup instead of a standard simple syrup. See what happens. I don't know what's going to happen. It might be gross, but getting to utilize those flavors in a direct standpoint without wavering them or changing them from what they are is awesome. Or make some oleosaccharides out of some pine cones. Do whatever you want to do, but it's just bringing the outside into your glass. It's just it's elevating the cocktail game, I guess you could say. I prefer small batch things. I don't really go for the masses of stuff. So if I knew of a cocktail bar that said, hey, Saturday we sent Jimmy out to XYZ Park and he got this, it's going on the menu today. Like he found some black-eyed Susans and that's going to be our garnish. Or he found wild basil growing over there and star anise seed and he picked those and he made a tea for our non-alcoholic cocktail or something. There's so many options. You just got to try it.
I love the non-alcoholic call out there because what those cocktails suffer from most often is this perceived lack of specialness, right? You're taking something out of them. And I've done plenty of NA cocktail content in the past. So anybody who wants to learn more about that can check out some of those past episodes, but I don't care. I don't care how good it can be done. Most of the time they suffer from that lack of specialness. So to add a foraged component to especially an NA cocktail where you put it next to maybe one of the regular cocktails that doesn't have that foraged component, somehow we're kind of like, ooh, we're putting everybody on equal standing because it doesn't have that feeling. It has a feeling that something has been added rather than just subtracted. So I love that call out. And when I think of cocktail bars, I think one of their chief struggles when it comes to differentiation and keeping people interested and coming in to see what new things they've got is just struggling to generate new ideas. Because if all you can really do in the cocktail world at this point is riffs on a classic, which is it exists for a reason. We've pretty much found out all of the cocktail formats that really work. So we're just riffing on classics now. But if all you can do is that riff on a classic, you start to run out of ideas real fast. You can only swap in so many Amaros. You can only swap in, so many base spirits for the other, in an old fashioned. But when the creative input is the external world, when nature gets to sort of dictate of like your creative constraints, suddenly you don't have to sit there, in the thinker pose and rack your brain for another Oaxacan old fashioned. You can just say, what's it doing outside? Oh, yep, let's go take a walk, right? When a walk in the woods can give you your idea without you having to try for it, A, you just got some exercise, and B, you're doing something inherently more creative than the bar next door. So I think for that reason, foraging is a really exciting way to get into cocktail development. And the last thing I want to appreciate about what you were saying is that, like, yeah, there's nothing fresher than foraging something and then cooking it right there while you're camping or something like that. And to me, the one group that we've left out so far is home bartenders. And that campfire, that fireside thing is exactly what you get when you go out in your backyard, forage something and bring it in the house and literally make a cocktail out of it right then and
Absolutely.
there.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking on this, one of the easiest things a bar could do with foraging is make a saline solution out of salt that's in your area. Let's just say the coast of Maine. If you're a bar in the coast of Maine, steal this idea, please. Grab some salt water, dehydrate it down, and make your saline out of, your natural salt, and use that in your cocktails. I guarantee you it's going to taste different than using a kosher salt or a pink Himalayan salt or whatever. It's going to be, your customers are going to know it without even being told about it. They're just going to feel it and understand it all. But even to your home bartender or a cocktail party you're having for friends, like, what a cooler way to elevate your cocktail than, not even, let's even take foraging out of it for a second and say the home gardener, because that's foraging in an aspect, because you're still foraging that plant. You grew some dahlias and you took those and you froze the petals in an ice cube and you put that into there. Or you grew your mint. Well, your mint overgrew your garden and you had an excess of it. So you're using that for your mojitos or for your Kentucky Derby party. Like, those little things, some people might be like, well, it's not worth it. Like, no one's going to care. Who cares if they don't care? Like, if you care about it, I guarantee you other people are going to care about it and feel that just that little bit of extra mile was put.
To me, one of the things that it seems like you're describing right now is a type of grounding, and cocktails are, unlike food, we don't need cocktails to survive. Cocktails are inherently frivolous. Spirits are inherently frivolous in a way that, like, ferments are not, right? Like, ferments actually saved us when water was not potable, but spirits and cocktails are frivolous in a way that food and ferments are not frivolous. And it seems like you're talking about this sort of grounding of the cocktail experience or the distilled spirits experience by having this reference point that is present and literally of the earth. Like literally you can point over to that body of water and say salt, or you can point over to, that patch of woods and say birch, right? Like that's or in your backyard when sipping that, Kentucky Derby mint julep, say, oh yeah, I grabbed that mint from right over there. Like that's a type of immediacy and grounding that I think a lot of cocktails don't benefit from. So, I mean, personally, I'm really glad that we were able to have this conversation and throw around these ideas, because I think it's just so overlooked as a way to add specialness to distilled spirits and cocktails. And I'm really glad that foraging, especially right now in the spring when so much is coming alive in our temperate zones of the world, a great time to have the conversation. What are you excited about that's about to become available, or maybe later in the year, maybe a fall forage? Like, are there any ingredients that you're just like sitting there rubbing your hands together, waiting to get your fingers on?
Yeah, I'm dying to get to mulberries this year. So oddly enough, in Manchester, where I am, mulberries were a huge part of our manufacturing out here in the early 1900s, because we had the Cheney silk mills, and the silkworms grew on the mulberry tree, and they would hand collect the worms in the silk casing and hand spin all their silk. They employed 5,000 people in 1920s. They were worth $15 million back then. Not in today's money, but back then money, which is wild. And I want to just make a mulberry moonshine, bring it back here, because mulberries are delicious. They're not around very often, but my dad has 2 mulberry trees in his backyard that he was going to cut down. And I said, no, you're not. So save those. And I'm building a tarp underneath it for when it comes down so I can catch all the berries, save myself a little bit of back work, bring those in. And I also So that might be a single ferment, single distillation, but I also I have a rotary evaporator as well, where I'll be able to make a very unique distillate from that. That is, kind of like a flavor bomb in a sense, and I'll be able to add that to something I'm cooking, or an extract for beer, or just a flavor for my vodka, because why not? It's going to be fun, and I get to encapsulate that flavor now forever. It's not like the season's gone, I can't have it anymore. It's like, oh man, I really wish I had that mulberry again, but it's the dead of winter. Let me just open this bottle. Be able to have it.
Yeah, I mean, the rotary evaporator is a really useful tool, and interestingly, I think it's a tool actually prized by people who understand foraging. I mean, you and I are both fans of the work being done up at Tamworth Distilling, and they utilize the rotary evaporator a ton, and they're also doing a ton of foraging. So,
yeah, they are an inspiration to me for sure, with how they're just not following the same old beaten path of flavors. They put trout roe in whiskey. That's the best thing I've ever heard. Just skirting the line, like the Oeil de Musk for their vanilla. Like, that is just breaking the boundaries of distillation, and flavors of distillation is something that I don't really see many distillers doing, because it's so rooted in these old ways and old flavors. And I mean, that's a whole nother tangent for another day, but just the regulations and laws we have are so old too, that it's like, let's just bust out of this category a little bit and do something weird. And the fact that they're kind of leading the way on it and showing that there is a want for it, just gives me that much more motivation to try some really weird things that might not work, but what are you going to do?
Well, it sounds like you're going to do a lot of foraging and a lot of experimenting. So, well, before we jump into lightning round here, is there anything that we totally missed that in a discussion about foraging, spirits, and cocktails, you think is just egregious that we passed over and forgot to mention?
No, I think we bumped and jumped around, but I really think we hit a lot about it all. I think obviously we could dive deeper into every subject we had today, but end of the day is open your door, walk outside, find some stuff on the ground or in the water, and utilize it. Just do it. The worst that's going to happen is you're going to say, well, I went outside today and that didn't taste great.
Yeah.
But
yep.
That's it. But you were outside, you got to enjoy it, and you did something that was uncomfortable or you weren't necessarily confident about, and hopefully it can build you up and realize you don't have to always go to the grocery store to get your stuff.
Yeah, totally. Well, with that, let's jump into the lightning round. First one is a desert island scenario. You're stranded on a desert island without prospect of rescue. You get to bring one bottle of distilled spirits, and you get to have one cocktail either perpetually on tap or, you've got all the ingredients readily available to make it. What's your desert island bottle? What's your desert island cocktail?
Desert island bottle, just because I didn't want to go with something that I make, I would probably go with Hard Shore Distilling up in Portland, Maine. I absolutely love their gin. Give me either one of them, they're barrel aged or they're regular, and I'll be fine and dandy. And then for my cocktail, if you wouldn't mind putting daiquiri on draft, that'll be just a standard traditional daiquiri made as is. I don't even need a coupe. You can give me a pint glass of that.
I love it. It's a true industry answer. Love the DAC. Since this is a conversation about foraging, what is one place on Earth, like a destination that you would love to just go and to, hike around and forage, either for the purpose of, just popping something into your mouth and crunching down on it, or with the purpose of like designing the ultimate forage spirit?
So this was I was torn between two places. It was either
Doing
the
both.
coast of France or the heart of South America, because they both have just such unique ingredients to them. Like the I'm going to blank on the name of the flower right now on the coast of France. Great job, Tony. But it only grows there. I will message you in a second. But
Sure.
being able to utilize that, and then of course South America, because how rainy it is, and cocoa pods, this and that, and just all those would just be fun to make something from a humid climate, and see what that can create. But I'll travel anywhere if there's dirt, plants, and water. Put me there. I'm good.
Are you talking Atlantic coast or Mediterranean coast of France?
Atlantic coast.
Armoise flower?
I believe that's it.
Could be. Yeah. I had a little experimental project with a buddy of mine. We were trying to recreate.
No, it's Genepi.
Genepi. Yeah. Oh, okay. So yeah, we were trying to recreate Genepi, and so we actually got a bunch of ingredients in from France, and Genepi was obviously one of them, but then our Armoise flower was another one. Cool. If you could have a drink, cocktail, or a dram with anybody in the world, past or present, who would it be? Where would you go? What would you have? Just kind of paint us a picture.
John G. Martin. He was the CEO of Hubline Distilling here in Connecticut. So as I've started my journey, my business, I've been studying about Connecticut cocktail history and Connecticut liquor history, which there's a lot of it. And he just was quite the businessman. And I would want to have it at his Hubline Hotel in Hartford, which is no longer. I'd say, let's say it's around right after the war, so like 1946. 47. He's just made the Moscow Mule something after him and his friend who owned a ginger beer company. He was struggling to sell Smirnoff. His friend was struggling to sell ginger beer because Americans didn't like vodka and Americans didn't like ginger beer. They like ginger ale and they like whiskey. So they met together. They coined the Moscow Mule with the ginger beer, lime, and Smirnoff. And they needed to put it in something. And as the story goes, it's not fully corroborated, but a lady who was there had inherited a copper factory from her father when he passed away. And she said, well, I can put it into cups for you. And
nice.
Henceforth that. So I would just love to be in that time frame and see the hustle and bustle of manufacturing during that day.
Yeah, I noticed from following you on social media that you're also a big history buff. What are some of the recent acquisitions that you've gotten your hands on?
So I have two original liquor prescriptions from the 1930s from Connecticut. One was for a woman she got gin for her gin fever, and the other gentleman, Fred, he got a quart of rum for his anorexia. Drunk munchies, it helps. So, and I also have, these are all vintage liquor ads from Life magazine. A couple of them are from, what was made in Hartford, Connecticut. That's a bottle right there from Sissonav Pharmacy of gin from the 1920s at Hartford. And a couple of bottles that were distilled here in Connecticut of Smirnoff, because Smirnoff won't say that Hartford made it on their website, but I obviously have proof on a bottle that said it was distilled and bottled in Hartford, Connecticut. So if anybody from Smirnoff wants to fight, let's go. Nice.
The things you learn by digging into history. Well, I want to wrap this up by saying that you've scratched a lot of itches for me in this conversation today. I think when it comes to conservation, you're never going to find better conservationists than people who are hunting, fishing, and foraging on a land. I will stand by that to this day, and you will never find people who are more creative and more passionate about doing something in the present than those who actively go into history to really understand the origins and sort of the arc of time and that explains why we are where we are today. So I'm very excited for what you're about to start putting out now that your distillery is up and running. So can you give our listeners the best way to follow you and to check out what you're doing when you start releasing your brandies and your gins and your rums and all the stuff that you're going to put through that still in that rotovap?
Yeah. Instagram is probably going to be the easiest way. The business is 8th District Distilling Company, spelled out EIGHTH. And then my personal one is at Tony Gugino. Either or, I'll be posting them from both. And then I'm located in Manchester. If anybody wants to come down, shoot me an email, Tony at LIQD LLC. Come down, say hello. I'll be more than happy to, talk you through about Connecticut liquor history, talk you through about some foraging and distillation, or just nerd out on any and all three of them. Welcome to any conversations on Instagram. I'll give you my cell phone. Doesn't matter to me. I'd love to have more conversations if possible.
Well, Tony, thanks for sharing all the knowledge today. And we're very excited for everything that's going to come down the line here from Manchester and from 8th District. And thank you, most importantly, for being a guest here on the Modern Bar Cart podcast.
No, thank you again, Eric. Long time coming, but I'm excited to get going. And let's chat again in the future, me and you.
Cheers, man.
Do this again.